Talking about the unprecedented Kentucky Derby that just happened, with the horse being disqualified, and a couple very interesting things to show you about this particular date throughout history, and a few other things. So I'm here talking about the Kentucky Derby that just happened on May 4th, and the sort of unprecedented, crazy events that happened where the horse wound up getting disqualified because of bumping into another horse and whatnot. Never happened before in the history of the Kentucky Derby. Now, a couple of things I just wanted to let you know, and I researched it because I knew, again, there had to be something very compelling astrologically to show that, and I was able to get a good start time. Usually with things like this, we could get good start times. We certainly know the date, and it was pretty remarkable what I found out, so that's why I wanted to show it. A couple things. First, the Kentucky Derby, this was yesterday's event. I'm recording this on May 5th, but May 4th, 2019 at 6:52 p.m. in Louisville, Kentucky, that was when the race officially started. And this is actually a pretty standard time. They have it measured out pretty precisely. They get all the horses in the rack and ready to go by 6:50 p.m. That's supposed to be like the official start time, but it's usually a couple minutes later, and the official running tally was at 6:52. That's when the gates opened and the horses started to run. So we're going to look at this chart, but a couple things just to notice right away. Look at this ascendant. Again, this is a sidereal zodiac case study. I just mentioned this so that people understand. This is why we use sidereal zodiac. It's certainly why I do, and it's because of the kinds of things we're going to be seeing here. First of all, several planets up near the 29th degree, which is this Sandy point, and again, that's sidereal signs. Look at the ascendant, 2958. Notice how that is right at the edge of Virgo and Libra. And by the way, by the time the race was over, the ascendant was Libra. That's how close the ascendant was. Again, this is Lahiri Ayanamsha. This is one of the reasons why, again, I've said this before, I eventually just settled on using the Lahiri Ayanamsha because of things like this that we see. Notice a few other things. Look at the exact new moon. It was exact. It had just started to wax. Literally the exact second. 2007, 2003. That's as precise and exact as it could be. So we have the ascendant at the last degree. Watch, I'll advance this 1 minute. Watch, step forward. 1 minute later, a minute into the race, local time, the ascendant shifted from Virgo to Libra. A minute into the race. So this is what is called Sandy. I've been making these videos about this, what's called Gandanta point, but the Gandanta is when you get the Sandy points between the water and fire signs. That's called the Gandanta but it's the same principle that we're seeing here. When things change signs, they become unstable. But the most unstable is when it's between the water and the fire sign, because there's no nakshatra to bridge the transition. In this case, there was. It was in Chitra Nakshatra in both examples. It's still Chitra, but the first part of Chitra is in Virgo. The second part is in Libra. But it's still the Rashi Sandhi is what it's called. Sandhi means transition point, or boundary or border. So all of the Sandhi points between all of the signs are important. So any planet at 29 degrees or less than 1 degree is important. But when it happens between the water and the fire, of course, that's called Gandanta. That's even more severe. Okay, so again, this race started on the Sandhi point at the Graha Sandhi, and this was literally 6:52 local time. That's when they started the actual race. So a minute later, and by the time the race was done, it's usually about 2 minutes, the ascendant was still Sandhi in Libra, right? But it had moved from Virgo to Libra. Now, of course, what happened in the race, if you saw, the horse that wound up crossing the finish line first bumped another horse. He came out of his lane. 1 second. bumped another horse, he sort of came out of his lane and cut off another horse, and actually affected 2 or 3 of them, and then they wound up falling back. And so when you look at the video, it looks pretty compelling. Whether or not people like the fact that it happened, because a lot of people didn't, and they say, well, that kind of thing happens all the time or whatever. It actually doesn't happen all the time. There's bumping. The horses will bump a little bit, but this was different. You could see that the horse sort of got out of his lane and jostled several others, and there were like 4 complaints made right after the race. And but what the jockey said, who was on the horse that crossed the finish line first, said was that when they came around that final turn, all of the yelling from the crowd spooked the horse, because apparently this is a younger horse and he's not used to all that yelling from the crowd. So it kind of spooked the horse, and he kind of, got, sort of jittery, because they come around the home stretch and then people are like yelling. This is where a lot of the people are seated. And so the horse got spooked and then kind of lurched inward. And then the jockey pulled the horse back and got him back on track, and then he galloped to victory. But again, just notice this. Again, the horse got spooked, and look, this is all this spooked kind of Jeshta Gandanta energy. This is that kind of paranoid, like, whoa, what's all of this, right? Very much the energy of this moment, right? And again, the race started with all these planets, the sun and moon, in the 8th house from the starting point. So I'm going to unpack that a little bit first, but just, I'm just talking about the general story is fascinating. A couple other things, of course, this has to do with horses. Of course, there's one symbol more than any other in the entire zodiac that has to do with horses, and of course, that symbol is Ashwini, that nakshatra. Ashwini literally means horse. It's, the horses, or it's actually the horsemen or the horsewoman, and someone riding a horse or horses, and the fury of horses galloping. It's remarkable that this Kentucky Derby is done around this time every year, right after the sun has just left Ashwini Nakshatra, and instead it's in Bharani Nakshatra. And we know that the Kentucky Derby is pretty much in Bharani Nakshatra because it's done on the first Saturday in May every year. Now, I looked into the history a little bit, and it started being done on the first Saturday in May every year in 1931, I believe. It was 31, not 30. So that's when the tradition started to be the first Saturday in May. Now, we already know that the first Saturday in May is going to wind up being in Bharani Nakshatra, because the moon enters Aries by May 1st, the moon is already, pretty far into Aries. It's already at least about, 14 or 15 Aries on May 1st. But I want to show you something that's very interesting. And it's based on the precession, because I had some recent conversations about the precession of the equinoxes and the sidereal and the tropical zodiac. You can see very clearly, because I actually went back and looked, because the Kentucky Derby started this day on May 4th, 1875. it wasn't May 4th, but it was in 1875. So I used the exact same calendar date, May 4th, 2019, and May 4th, 1875. Look at the difference in where the sun is in the sidereal sky, this 145 years apart. In 1875, the sun was at 2158 of Aries, which is about 22 degrees Aries. Here, and that's that's about 4:30. If I move it forward, let me move it forward an hour. It's about the same, but it moves to 22, 5:21. So now this is actually closer. I'll move it back to exactly like. Oh no, it was 1850. That's right. So it was about right here. So 2204, and this is right 1852. This is 2007. So it's like exactly, 2003. Yeah. So 2003. Now, May 4th, 2019, May 4th, 1875, 2204. So you can see 2 degrees of ecliptic drift. This is what the eye nuptia is. This is why the sun keeps going backwards. Not just the sun, but all of the degrees of the planets keep going backwards relative to the precession of the equinoxes, because the Earth in its tilt is moving backwards in reference to the reference stars, right? Or reference to the sidereal space. I just wanted to show that because it's an interesting case study, because I did a recent video also where I spoke with astrologer Theo Naker, and we talked about the sidereal and tropical zodiacs. But here's a perfect example. And you can always measure it with the sun, because the sun is connected to Gregorian calendar dates. The Gregorian calendar dates are connected to the sun, particularly the sun and the tropical zodiac, right? So you can see how it's drifted 2 degrees, because the precession is about 1 degree every 70 years. So again, 1875, the sun was at 22 Aries. Here in 2019, it's at 20 Aries. Just a little way for you to also visualize this. So if you're 70 years old, the sun has actually drifted back relative to the precession of the equinoxes since your birth. I just wanted to make sure that we saw that too, because it's very interesting to see. Now back to the actual case study here as well, but you see all these planets in the 8th house. They're on this like 8th house cusp from the ascendant, because the ascendant is at the very last degree. If we were to back this up like 15-20 minutes, you could see, okay, so if it's about here, even this was a half hour earlier, then they're right on that 8th house cusp, because this is 23, and then sun and moon are like 19 and 20. But notice in the last half hour before the race, watch the degrees of the moon and the sun. They exact, look, this was like, 6:42. It's exact, the moon is as dark as it can get at 6:42, and then 10 minutes later, it's passed, and now it starts to wax. It passes 2003, and then it's 2004, 2005, 2007 at the beginning of the race. So the moon just started waxing, which means now it's that sense of increase, right? And the ascendant is at the last possible second, 29:58, right? 1 minute later, it's 0.10, right? So it changed, not even 1 minute. It turned, if we go 10 seconds, 10 seconds. It was 10 seconds. At 16:52, it was 10 seconds away. So again, this is 16:52. It could have been some change. It could have been right at the 0 point. Regardless, it's on that Sandy point, literally 10 seconds away, and it's 0 Libra. So wherever you are on this, this shows the uncertainty and the instability of these Sandy transition moments. This is why they're unpredictable. They're uncertain. So there was that sense of volatility and uncertain potential. Not to mention, it was not only at that transition, but it was this transition, this sun-moon. See, what happens is when things are at these points of transition, there's a fragile, like, exchanging of energy going on that's unpredictable. And so, again, what happened is the race started, it seemed to finish a certain way, but then it got reversed. It got shifted. It got destroyed. Again, 8th house energy. And again, that's why I told the story behind it, is because the horse got spooked when he was coming around because of the crowd noise, and they've never taken away a victory from a horse like that before because of interference. So again, if we actually move this forward a little bit, if we move it forward a couple minutes, then this was the end, by like 1854, 1855. Now they're in like the winner circle. It took like 15 or 20 minutes before they declared the winner. Everyone was then waiting. There's this waiting period. I should find the exact moment that they declared the victory, because this is now 6, so even by 7 p.m., which was about maybe 7 or 8 minutes after, now they still haven't made a decision yet, but now the ascendant is clearly Libra. And again, let's also notice what's Libra. What does the sign mean? It's about what? Fairness, Certainly things like sportsmanship, justice, fairness, huge issue with Libra. And again, now we have the exalted ruler here in Pisces, and again, all these planets are now, this new moon that just started in Aries is in the 7th house, which is saying we have to think of everybody else now. Plus there were complaints lodged. They had like 3 or 4 complaints and they had to look at it. They went back and looked at the film and said, yeah, there was definitely some bumping. And again, this stuff happens all the time. And of course there were some people who were not happy about it, but that also shows this Aries like, what? You took victory away from us and all this stuff. Some people were not happy about it, but fairness, at least in the eyes of the judges, won the day, and they proclaimed I don't remember the name of the horse, the victor instead of the original one. Now we also see here a couple other things. Very exact aspect between Mars and Jupiter. This is also one of the things that, and Jupiter's retrograde back toward the exact applying aspect. And when the ascendant moves from here to here, then this Mars in the 9th house becomes Mars in the 8th house, aspecting Jupiter then in the 2nd house, retrograde. Now again, I'll talk about this in a second as well, but notice how this shifts here. Either way, there's a lot of 8th house energy. When it started, there was Venus in the 7th and Mercury, Sun, Moon in the 8th when they started, right? When they ended and when the decision was made, like, again, it was, I think it said 20 minutes after the race ended, which would have been like, certainly well after 7, maybe like 7:10 or something. But you had this Mars Jupiter exact aspect. Also, Mars is exactly aspecting the Saturn Ketu in the 8th from himself. So Mars is putting a lot of aspects here exact onto Jupiter to the degree. And also it's separating from Saturn Ketu, but it's still there. And so again, it just shows a potential for destruction, blowing things up, shifting things, changing things suddenly. And the other thing is you have this 2nd and 8th house axis here, which is very much about things like gambling, other people's money. Money is 2nd house. 8th house has to do with gambling and the thrill of gambling, and again, other people's money in that regard. It's literally because it's other people's 7th house, money and resources, the 2nd from the 7th. And so anything where you're like gambling and there's a whole lot of people's money involved, there's a lot of 8th house energy going on there, because it's also things like, the possibility of treachery and deceit and theft and underhanded things, cheating. So you can see how this Mars really kind of blew up the whole, like, people thought they got this money and then it got shifted and changed and taken away, and then other people suddenly got money because the one that wound up winning, if you were holding that ticket, you were really happy because I think it was something like a $2 bet paid off like $130 or something like that, which is a lot. I don't gamble, so it's kind of a little over my head, that part of it. But it's still a fascinating case study of where you see the issues and the themes played out very clearly with the 2nd and the 8th house. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about, because I talked about this in the new moon video as well, like a couple days before, is the things I talked about when I spoke about Bharani Nakshatra. Okay? It comes after Ashwini. I literally use this example all the time. Ashwini is the nakshatra of horses. And 2 horses running forward, hopefully, running toward the same direction, hopefully. And I always say one of the things about Ashwini is we need to make sure that the horses are running in the same direction. In this case, literally, we had something where horses bumped into each other, because when the horses aren't running in the same direction, like in your life, you have to bear the consequences. Bharani, bearing the result. And I always say, and I even said in my recent update, that we have to be careful about what? punishment, severe consequences of our misdirected energy, our energy being unfocused and scattered, it's going to produce a result. And we have to bear that result. That's the root word of botany. It's literally like the bearers, those who have to bear the result. That's why the symbol is like female reproductive organs, the uterus and the thing that creates a result. And we literally saw it. That's why of course I'm always noticing this stuff. This is why I say, and I've been saying more lately, the best way to learn astrology is watch the sky, particularly like what's the big news of the day. Notice things like the nakshatra. Try to get a local time and draw up a chart, and I guarantee you'll see it, especially if you know what you're looking at. But this is why I'm doing it, because I'm showing you what it is. I'm showing you the uncertainty of the result. I'm showing you the specifics of even things like this is where Ashwini becomes Bharani. And literally the Kentucky Derby comes on Bharani every year. Because the sun has, on May 1st, the sun has been, the sun enters Aries like on April 14th or 15th. So by May 1st, it's already in Bharani Nakshatra, and then it's the first Saturday. So then there's about 7 days. So it's always going to be around it'll always be around 20. Well, it might be 15, 16, 17 to like 22, which is always going to be Bharani. I don't think it would be because that would start at 20. That would start at 24. It might, maybe 23, 20. It could be, possibly. Yeah. But it's very much, this is the energy of that section of the sky. It's literally a symbol of horses and that forward momentum. And the Kentucky Derby, again, you want to also understand, it's not just this race because there was having to bear the result and the consequences of getting out of your lane and having the horse run sideways. But it's actually horses running, and then the result comes after horses run. I mean, it's literally, if there's one thing that could show something like the Kentucky Derby or the horse racing season, it would be, or the start of it, it would be Ashwini and Bharani. Of course, because Ashwini is the horses, but Bharani is even more so because it's the result, and even the the consequences of training horses. I mean, this is a lot of money and resources and a lot of results. People are putting down all this money, and all of that intention produces a result on the day of the horse race. So the day of the horse races is Bharani of the Kentucky Derby, is Bharani Nakshatra, Lord Yama, the result of your actions, and all of that karma that you put into that horse race. So think about everything that those people who train those horses, the people that went to the racetrack, all that they had invested in those horses running, the result come down in Bharani in a specific form. And it's usually just that a horse wins. But again, the reason this one was so transformative is because, and again, I have to go back and look, but I think probably the Kentucky Derby is run, I think these times are pretty set in stone. I think usually 1650, this is usually the time that they run it every year, which is weird because they usually run it every year right when the Ascendant is Gandanta. I'm going to go back and look a little bit and see if it's always at 1850, which is 6:50 p.m. or like 6:52, which is it's literally 10 seconds away. But the reason it was so transformative this year is because it wasn't only run at this time, so that would always mean that the sun is going to be in the 8th house. And it's always going to be in this Gandanta point if that's the time, if that's the set time. There's always going to be this. And then by the end of it, the Ascendant has moved into Libra, probably. Let's see, if it's 6:50, yeah, then 2 minutes later, it's still barely in Virgo. So maybe they get them in the rack at 6:50, and then they actually start the race at 6:52. But it's pretty regimented. But this year, the reason it was so transformative is because of these other things. You don't have a new moon every year. That's why this one was so different. Even if all of them are 6:52 and it starts with the Ascendant right in the Gandanta point and the moon in the 8th house, those are the only two things you could be certain of. All the other planets are variable. We don't always have Saturn K2 in the 4th. We don't have this Jupiter-Mars aspect, Jupiter retrograde, also in the Gandanta point, Mars aspecting him. We certainly don't have, like 5 minutes after the exact darkest moon. All of that had to line up. And again, by the way, you just want to also understand this is totally sidereal, full sign, full house, sidereal zodiac, Vedic astrology systems and techniques that are explaining this. It would be much harder to explain it this clearly with tropical and all this. Of course you can, because it was still the new moon. It was still likely in the 8th house. It actually might have been 7th house when you use the house systems that they use. But in Vedic, it's very clear. These distinctions and these lines, full house, full sign, everything is on the ecliptic longitude in the sidereal sky. And that's what these boundaries are. And again, not to be redundant, but that's why I feel like the ancients, all of the techniques in Vedic astrology, which is what I'm using to interpret this chart, line up with the sidereal calculation. You see all of the principles come together immediately. There's nothing to question about it. The zodiacs themselves are the foundational point for the techniques that are interpreting them, right? So notice that, and notice this case study, and I think it's pretty remarkable. And I just wanted to make a quick video. Again, it doesn't take me long. I started to research this myself yesterday and said, man, this is awesome. So just going to make a quick video and share it, and I hope this case study helped you understand a few things. And yeah, just the last thing, it's just fascinating to watch in case you don't understand. This is what the precession of the equinoxes looks like. May 4th, 2019, the sun is at 20 degrees and 3 seconds, right? And then May 4th, 1875, it was at 22 because of the precession of the equinoxes, right? So, fascinating stuff, and I hope you enjoy this video. Share it with others, and subscribe if you want to get more videos like this. Ring the bell.